Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano, and in this video I'm going to tell you why you absolutely should not dirty bulk or do any bulking or muscle building methods that allow you to go crazy. And I'll explain why with my own experience after I roll my intro. So, I've dirty bulked in the past. I've had friends who've dirty bulked. I've helped people who have dirty bulked and who have clean bulked. And my own personal experience isn't that, well, it's exactly what you'd expect with a dirty bulk actually. But this video is going to warn you why you shouldn't dirty bulk beyond just my own experience. So, what is dirty bulk? Dirty bulk is eating any calories, no restrictions, whatever you want so that you can jam pack your calories high along with getting the appropriate protein and training so that you can build as much muscle as you possibly can. At the same time, it comes with this acceptance of the fact that you're going to add fat. That's why they call it bear mode, like preparing for hibernation type thing. So, what is the alternative to dirty bulking? Well, it could be clean bulking or any sort of space between dirty and clean. And a lot of people have this conception of clean bulking, that it's, brown rice, chicken breast, and salad all day long, and that's what you eat to hit 1,000 calorie surplus, right? First thing I'm gonna say is that clean eating isn't what you think it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a clean bulk is going to be more effective. So right away, when it comes to effectiveness, even if you have the cleanest bulk, by the definitions I'm about to explain, compared to a dirty bulk, there's always this calculation in your head where you're trying to say, okay, if I add an extra 10 pounds of fat, I need a little bit more time to cut so that I can lose that extra 10 pounds, right? There's always that calculus that you're going through where you're basically considering the ratio of fat gained to the amount of time you have to lose that fat. So it's basically the fat loss ability to fat gain potential calculation here. So, of course, the premise that's implied with clean bulking is that you're not going to add as much fat, right? Now, how do you do that? Well, what clean eating is going to do is not going to come from brown rice. It's not going to come from whole grains. It's not going to come from all the stuff that people commonly associate with the bodybuilder bulk. So, one of the things that I preach for on my page is I do many types of bulking methods. I do keto bulking, I do carb bulking at times in the past, and I help people with any method they choose. But when it comes to a clean bulk, what's going to be important here is that you're not jacking the calories up too high, because I always talk about insulin sensitivity and essentially how effective your body is going to be at using insulin. This is key for muscle building as well, and of course there are different areas in your body that are more sensitive to insulin. The point is, when you're jacking your calories up to 5,000 calories a day and you have 700 grams of carbs in there, I don't know if the math adds up on that, but when you have that high of an amount of carb and that high of an amount of calories, your insulin sensitivity is going to drop. That is just a fact. You can look it up. That's the dynamic of insulin. If somebody were to eat that much with that much sugar, they would absolutely gain more fat, and that would be partly a result of how resistant they are to insulin. So, not many people know that the flip side of the coin of insulin sensitivity is that it helps you build muscle more effectively, right? Because if you're less sensitive to insulin, what's going to happen is you're going to be more likely to put on fat every time you eat carbs or a certain amount of calories that is going to trigger a higher insulin response. So, clean eating doesn't necessarily have to be brown rice. It doesn't necessarily have to be any sort of whole grain, if you're choosing to include carbs, of course. Because when you have these brown or whole grain sources of wheat, what's going to happen is it's filled with a protein called wheat germ agglutinin. So typically the more whole grain a product is, the more lectin content it's going to have. So lectins basically will make it harder for your body to digest because they're plant proteins. Some of them are actually defense mechanisms from the plant, so that, example, seeds can pass through your digestion, other things like that. Because plants want to procreate as well. And this is commonly found in grains. It can be found in certain clean vegetables, because some people will say just eat chicken and rice all day. That's the typical bodybuilder diet. Meanwhile, if we look back to the 70s and 80s and the golden era bulking methods, even beyond that, 60s and 50s, all the bodybuilders never seem to go into this bear mode, where they're adding fat just as much as they're adding muscle. They actually seem to be very lean. And this will tie into a lot of the keto bulking videos I've made, because spoiler alert, the bulking methods of those older generation of bodybuilders had a higher emphasis on fat and protein intake rather than carb intake. The golden era guys weren't jamming an extra 5 bowls of oatmeal every day. What they were prioritizing was clean fats and clean proteins, and then strategically maybe they'd throw in a carb source. They actually were more afraid of carbs than people are now, because they thought that it would make them fat, for a lot of these guys at least. So they would pack on the fat calories and the protein calories, but of course from appropriate sources. What do I mean by appropriate sources? Clean, healthily raised animal products, rather than, Walmart dozen eggs. You know what I'm saying? So they would have cleaner, healthier animal sources for their animal sourced foods, and at the same time their vegetables probably would have been less exposed to pesticides and all of the sort. But mainly they were focusing on the macro that everybody ignores when they're clean bulking, which is basically fat. And a lot of people focus on the carb macronutrient when they're dirty bulking. So if you're trying to bulk, don't focus on the carbs necessarily, because again, not all calories are the same. That's another premise I want to break here. That's another belief I want to destroy here for you. Not all calories are the same. Now, people say there's studies where you have people with different macro ratios and calories were the determiner of fat loss, right? That is true. Calories are the primary determiner of fat loss. But we know that, example, protein has a higher metabolic load with it, basically. You have to increase your body temperature more to digest protein. So it's the most thermogenic of all the proteins, or of all the macronutrients, rather. So theoretically, if you were to have somebody who just ate protein all day long at 2,000 calories, and you had somebody who ate a mix of macros at 2,000 calories, I mean, even though the person who ate protein all day would probably be taxing certain organs in their body, that person should theoretically be in a greater calorie deficit as a result of eating the same amount of calories. So, of course, you can Google these things. I'm just synthesizing the principles and mechanisms from all the books that I've read and studies that I've consulted. So basically, not all calories are the same, and many of you know about the thermogenic effect of protein. And if you think about it, it makes logical sense. So, if we know that not all calories are the same, that should mean that there's not a linear relationship. Well, that could imply there's not a linear relationship with calories and size gained, right? And again, spoiler alert, there isn't a linear relationship between muscle mass built and total calorie intake. There are plenty of studies out there where you could look up how people at an extra 2,000 calorie surplus didn't gain significantly more muscle than people who had just the 1,000 calorie surplus. But what they would gain would be more fat. And this draws us back to insulin sensitivity again. Because when you have a greater insulin sensitivity, meaning that your body is more sensitive to insulin because you're not jamming your throat filled with sugar all day and excessive calories. So when you're more sensitive to insulin, your body will be better at making lean gains rather than fatty gains. And the higher your calories go, there's going to be a drop in the anticipated muscle gain, because there's going to be a disproportionately larger amount of fat gained rather than simply more calories equals more muscle. And at that point, there's going to be this means that at a certain point of calorie increase, you're going to hit a point where the returns start to diminish. You're going to hit a point where the fat gain potential is so much greater than the muscle gain potential that it's actually going to ruin you for your cut. Now, that's a common concern we have with the cut, as I said before, the calculation between how much fat can I lose with the amount of time and how much muscle can I gain. But realistically, unless you're somebody who is just completely yoked already and you just need to force calories, that is the only exception. But you're probably going to be just as responsive at that point to any sort of bulking method, because you've probably added most of the muscle mass your genetic potential allows for at that point. Last thing I'm going to say, which is actually very, very complex and you're going to want to stay in here because it requires a lot of breaking down, is the Mtor pathway in your body. So Mtor is the master muscle building pathway in your body. And in order to stimulate it, you need a certain amount of insulin, and leucine is the only protein that's capable of stimulating Mtor. So what this means is calories is not necessarily the stimulator of the main muscle building pathway in your body. Maybe indirectly, the insulin response that a certain amount of calories will create can stimulate Mtor, perhaps. But this means that you simply need an effective response of insulin, right? Going back to the insulin sensitivity, which your body can get that effective insulin response from protein, not necessarily just all the sugar in the world or all the calories in the world, but you need an appropriate amount of insulin and an appropriate amount of leucine, or proteins in general, but leucine comes with an insulin response at the same time. So basically, you need an appropriate amount of protein and an appropriate amount of calories to trigger the appropriate insulin response in the right quantity. Mtor itself can also be influenced by fasting, for example. So if you were to fast and eat one meal a day, a lot of people anecdotally will claim that they gain more muscle that way. It checks out logically, because what's going to happen is you're going to not be hitting the Mtor button all day long, right? If you're eating 5 meals a day, your insulin and leucine, or whatever protein content you take in, are going to be pressing the Mtor button, right? And your body's going to be getting so used to having that pathway activated that it's going to be less sensitive to it. This is how it is for a lot of functions in the body. They gain sensitivity if you aren't, stimulating them all the time. So with Mtor, it's almost like this stretching expansion that when you're fasting all day long and you're not activating Mtor, right, because there's no calories coming in, you're going to create a larger Mtor response with the same amount of insulin and protein, right? This is common with the research on Mtor. So does that necessarily mean you have to fast every day to get better Mtor response? Not necessarily, but it just means that Mtor is the key here, not simply, jack up the calories, jack up the carbs and protein. The only requirement to build muscle is adequate training stimulus and protein and a decent amount of energy, because at a certain point your body's not going to prioritize looking aesthetic as hell, but it's going to prioritize whether or not your liver's functioning. So training is ultimately the key here. We know that calories matter. We know that you need an adequate amount of protein. We know that carbs can be strategically used if you choose to, but getting healthy amounts of fats, which are going to be key for, cholesterol production, which is the precursor to any hormone in your body, which ideally will be the precursor to testosterone in this case, if you're trying to build muscle, whether you're a man or a woman. And overall, it will prevent you from building more fat than muscle. So hopefully this video has taught you that not all calories are the same. And I'll even throw in the little bit here that not all carbs are the same too, because a lot of people will jack up the fruit smoothies and stuff, and high fructose, which funny enough is the sweetener for Pepsi and Coca-Cola, high fructose corn syrup, is going to jam pack your liver with carbs rather than your muscles. And fructose is also the sweetest carb. So even though indirectly they may have the same thermogenic effect for carb to carb, but where this carb gets transported to and what it does in your body is a different story with fructose, sugar, and simple starches, simple sugars. So the last thing I'll say, actually, because I'm just on a good little train of thought here, is it's very hard to avoid kryptonite on dirty bulks. What I mean by kryptonite is, as I was saying before, the foods that you think are clean are not necessarily clean. Wheat germ agglutinin and other lectins in foods, anything planted really, but lectins can be in even animal products that have been fed, certain GMOs or other plants opposed to their natural diet of grass. Dirty bulking essentially can do nothing to protect you from kryptonite and GMOs, soy, phytoestrogens, lectins, antinutrients, anything that doesn't exclude, certain processed foods or doesn't care about food quality is going to leave you prone to additives and things you don't want. Even MSG is commonly put in all the sweet, delicious snacks that come very popularly on dirty bulks. So MSG, for example, is thrown in to make foods taste better than they are, and it makes you hungrier, So it makes you more inclined to eat more calories and thus probably add more fat. But when you're not using a plan that doesn't eliminate MSG or other excitatory neurotoxins that are added to food so that you find them tasting better, and that what they actually do as well is they make it harder for you to get the same amount of excitement from a certain food with other foods, basically. So you can only, the Cheese Whiz, which I know has MSG, basically, is going to taste as good to you compared to other foods. And you're going to keep going back to those certain foods that are undoubtedly filled with trash you don't want to put in your body, which again can do a variety of things. Things that will contradict your bulking goals because perhaps they'll make you add more fat. Things that might mess with you on a hormonal level, right? If you're getting things with artificial dyes in them, red food coloring, those things, even estrogenic compounds, what they'll do is they will make you more likely to add fat, right? Which we already established is not good for your bulking goals, but they could make you store toxins in your flesh, right? These things could be filled with antinutrients, and those things are more commonly associated with dirty foods where you have no restrictions and you're eating things that with no regard to if they have artificial dyes, aspartame, any carcinogenic sweeteners, anything like that. So at the end of the day, the point with the kryptonite is not only might it mess up your digestion and make the experience of bulking unpredictable and shitty, pun heavily intended, but what it will do is it can mess with your body on levels that you can't even anticipate because you're simply eating everything in sight. So again, this can be as simple as things that make certain foods taste better, but it can also be as complex as things that, will bury themselves in your fat cells and you won't know about them until 20, 30 years down the line. So that is my rant against dirty bulking. I have never had a good dirty bulk experience. Of course, I've had, mixed results since it's muscle gain plus fat gain, but I will absolutely preach for cleaner bulking methods. What I mean by this is you could do keto bulks, you could do carb bulks, but whatever you do, keep the dirty part to a minimum or at least have some discretion. My ideal bulk is I do some keto bulking, I do some carb bulking. At the end of the day, you want to keep a baseline and have, strategic amounts of, you have a dirty day here and there, a cheat day type thing, but of course with good discretion. Hopefully this video has educated you on dirty bulking, why you should absolutely not do it. It is not worth it. It has never been shown to add more muscle. It's simply been shown to add more fat. And if you're somebody who's never cut before, it's also going to be a problem because it's going to make you more likely to gain fat and harder to lose fat. Little side note again, because the insulin sensitivity. When it comes to jacking up your calories to 5,000 a day from trash, down the line, you're going to be insulin resistant. So it's going to be harder for you to lose weight at first. Anyways, this has been a long but hopefully educational video for you. Leave me some comments about dirty bulking, clean bulking, anything of your liking, and I will answer you. Thank you for watching this video. Go to my website, romanoketo.com, for keto coaching and programs very soon. Thanks.